Okay, after much deliberation, I have decided that my swim set here is going to have purple in it. So I'm going to switch back to that tiny brush. Not going to worry too much about the little bit of red being in there because red plus blue equals purple. However, I do want to be super careful with the amount of water I'm using in this part. You don't want a lot of water here. A lot of water equals very, very little control. Use the very tips of your small flat, and I like to use flats because if you use like a pointed brush, you're more likely to, if you push down, it's more likely to go all over your painting. But it's all personal preference. Right here, we're literally putting in the outline to our face mask. You decide what color you want. Now, if you don't feel comfortable with doing this, you can always fill it in with colored pencil or something. I think I had one of my students has decided to do colored pencil as an experiment, and when he applied watercolor, it did not seem to stick. As you're going around the tube part of your painting, try to kind of curve your brush strokes just slightly as you apply your paint, because once this paint dries, you will literally get little brush stroke lines in your artwork, and it will really add a nice textured, see it? Got little lines in here. I'm going to wait for this layer to dry, and then I'll add an additional layer. Right now, if I add more paint, it's just going to go everywhere. However, I am going to fill this top here. As I'm working on the mouthpiece, I'll probably pick up some of this paint, spread it over. If you don't like how heavy your paint is, you have the option of redistributing it into other areas. We're working with a very small section here. Make sure that your brush is super small, that it can fit within these cracks and crevices. Okay, that's dry enough. If you want to add shadow, you need to wait until your first layer is dry. My layer is dry enough, I just checked. I'm going to add a nice strong thing here, and look, I have shadow. Like, this is all my light area. This is going to be my medium area in a minute, but hold on here. Okay, so I'm going to take a little drop, just the corner of my brush, into my water cup, just a little bit, and I'm going to kind of feather out this edge here to my shadow to kind of create a more gradual shift from light to dark. I can reignite that darkness by adding an additional layer of paint on the edge here. You see it? It's super dark, medium dark, light. Do the same thing here. This is how you get three-dimensional stuff in your artwork. There we go. Okay, we're going to let that dry. Now if you have gray, go ahead and use gray and do your drag and pull outline like what we did here, over here. However, I do not have gray, so I'm going to use a very small amount of black paint, and I'm going to create gray using that drag and pull technique. Now for you, you might not need as much paint. I mean, not paint. You might not. You might not have to worry. But I have to be super careful, and I have to be really light on the amount of paint I'm using because I'm trying to create gray. See, right here, my black has thinned out enough. The water in my brush has transformed it to a gray color. And we're literally going to do drag and pull areas. Pretty cool, huh? Just take your time coloring in these areas. Don't worry about your outline fading out. That is okay. We'll worry about that later. Add little tiny bits of water to your brush as needed, okay? And you can see that I've kind of transformed this into a gray. Now I'm kind of feathering in an additional layer of paint here. You see how this layer is getting a little bit darker here on the top? Just a tiny bit. That's okay. I don't want this area to be so dark underneath the sunglass because I'm literally going to have a really dark sunglass here. So I'm feathering out the intensity and I'm trying my darndest to spread it out into other areas. There we go. There's my gray. Okay. And for the black, pitch black. I'm going to spend a little bit more time in my paint palette here. I'm going to get some of this black in here. See how I'm kind of doing my strokes and allowing some of the white of my paper to kind of show through? I'm doing that on purpose because I want that white to kind of be the shine on my sunglass. I'm using the white of my paper to create a reflection. Sometimes you can use the white of your paper for these things. Now, be very gentle with your strokes here. Feather or butterfly kiss your bristles across the paper. You want that nice thin line. Use any of that extra paint to help darken a few areas that you're looking to darken, separate. Okay. I'm not going to play with this. Oh, I got some purple on there. I'm not going to play with this area. Probably give him a little goatee. There we go. It's a goatee. Okay. I'm not going to play with this area. I'm going to clean my finger. Just remember, if you make mistakes, you can always make them into something else. See, I made a mistake here. I accidentally got purple on the chin of my shark, but that's okay. It's okay. He's going to have a goatee. I'm going to fix it. You're going to see here in a minute. It's going to be super cool. Alright, so I'm going to continue kind of this trend with my eyeballs and with the tube part of my snorkel. Okay. Alright, as I mentioned before, I am not going to mess with any other parts. I am literally going to try to start to add my water. Since I'm dealing with such a large scale or a large amount of paper here, I'm literally going to use a big flat. Alright, so let's just add a very thin layer of water in the area that we plan on working. Revisit our cup and soak up some paint. And we can literally streak our way across the paper. And this, my friend, is called a wash. It's called a wash because everything's like washed out. That's how I remember it. Quite frankly, I wouldn't worry too much about getting paint in your bubbles because I will teach you how to use oil pastel to draw over your watercolor. So here, I just have the bubbles mapped out so I know where to put them. You could also use white crayon in that area if you really wanted to. I'm trying to use up my paint. And I'm just putting the general amount of strokes in here. But you see how I'm not getting too close to my swimmer or my snorkel dude? It's because I don't want to risk bringing out that brown. Now, if you need to switch to a smaller brush to get in between these areas, go for it. I just have a lot of experience being lazy and not switching my brushes out. But if you need to do it, do it. I'm being super careful not adding too much water to my brush, right? My brush is already pretty damp. Adding more water isn't necessary unless it starts getting dry and then my paint doesn't move around. So, okay, so you can see that my paper is shiny and reflective. That means it's still wet. So be super careful as you wait for that to dry. But I know this area isn't necessarily wet because see, look, this has been here for quite some time. So if you are a huge Sharpie nerd like myself, you could add details using colored Sharpies. You could also use oil pastel to add colors to your work, kind of give that contrasty look. For the super thin small areas like this mouth here, I used either Sharpie or pen to kind of bring that mouth out. Let me see if I have a black Sharpie here. Nope, I don't, so I'm going to use a black pen. And I'm literally going to draw my mouth in. That's why I said I wasn't going to mess with that area. I didn't really intend on having a goatee. But I have a goatee because I accidentally did that smudge of paint on my artwork. It was actually an accident, but it turned out looking okay. If you want to add texture to your shark using pen, you can. You could add some shadow lines to your snorkel. There's so many different ways that you can touch this up. Don't forget your nostrils. You can add eyelashes to your person if you want to. Maybe even a nose or some nostrils. Yeah? Alright, so my paper is still wet up here, so I'm going to wait and then I will show you what you can do with your oil pastel. Alright, now that my paper is dry, it's not reflecting anything, it's not cool to the touch, I'm going to show you what to do with the oil pastel. Tip trick here is to make sure that your surface is clean. You can wipe that off using tissue, cloth, what have you, but you want your tip clean before you start, or else your white for your bubbles are going to be all messed up with all different sorts of colors in them. But literally, I am just coloring on top of my watercolor to create my bubbles. And then for my fish, I will use colored pencil.